Dylan stared at his phone screen, the words, "We need to talk," staring back at him from Samantha's last message. The breakup was still fresh, too fresh, but he'd finally accepted it. The breakup wasn't a surprise. It had been a long time coming. Every relationship had its quirks, but with Samantha, it was like playing an emotional game of whack-a-mole. She'd ask a simple question, and suddenly it felt like his entire life was under review. "Do you love me? How serious are you? What are we even doing?" And of course, the dreaded one. "Are you ever going to grow up?" He tried to avoid these conversations with humor, changing the subject, pulling out his usual go-to lines. But now, after the final fight, where he'd nearly set her kitchen on fire trying to make her a romantic dinner, Dylan was officially out of excuses. He sat there, his hands gripping the sides of the chair, his mind racing. This wasn't the first time he'd been in this position, but something felt different this time. He needed to change. No, scratch that, he needed to transform. That's when he remembered the article. He'd been aimlessly scrolling through Instagram, wasting time like he did every night, when the phrase, "How to become emotionally invincible," caught his eye. It was one of those self-help posts, something motivational like, "If you want to be a better man, start with yourself." But this one had a twist, *Stoicism*. Stoicism. It sounded like the answer. A philosophy about being calm, detached, emotionally invulnerable to the world's chaos. It was perfect. No more emotional outbursts, no more letting feelings mess with his head. The internet described it as a way of finding peace by not letting things, especially relationships, rattle you. It was the perfect antidote to his immaturity. He'd read a bit more. Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca, these were the names that kept popping up. They were all famous Stoics who seemed to have achieved a calm that could make a Zen monk look like a stressed-out office worker. Dylan liked the sound of that. He could feel the old Dylan slipping away. He imagined himself walking into Samantha's life, the wise, composed philosopher who didn't get bogged down by petty drama. Stoic. Smooth. Unmoved by her playful teasing. "I can do this," he muttered under his breath, staring into the bathroom mirror. "I am emotionally invincible." He tried to recall the advice he had read online, forcing himself into a serious state of mind. He rehearsed his opening line for their inevitable conversation, something cool and collected, like an enlightened person confronting a crisis. "Samantha, I've spent time reflecting on my behavior." He paused and looked at himself. "That sounds too forced. Maybe just I'm at peace now." "Yeah, I'm at peace." After a few more minutes of mumbling, Dylan decided to give her a call. It wasn't just about winning her back. It was about showing her that he could be better, more mature. A grown man, capable of handling his emotions. She picked up on the third ring. Her voice was distant, like she knew what was coming. "Hey, Dylan," Samantha said, her tone flat. "Hey," he replied, his voice more monotone than usual. "I've been thinking. I need to apologize." She was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Oh? For what?" "For, being emotionally immature. I've been working on it. Actually, I've been reading a lot about Stoicism. I think it's helped me see things more clearly." There was another silence on the line. Dylan could practically hear her eyebrow raising. "Stoicism?" she asked skeptically. "Yeah, it's this philosophy about controlling your emotions, staying calm no matter what happens. I'm learning to embrace it. I'm not going to be reactive anymore. I'll be calm, collected, focused on what really matters." "I've changed, Sam." The silence stretched longer this time, and when Samantha spoke again, her voice had shifted, half disbelief, half amusement. "So what? You're like a robot now?" she asked, her laugh barely held back. Dylan's chest tightened, but he quickly suppressed any reaction. "No. I'm a Stoic," he corrected, as if that made him sound more refined. Samantha wasn't having it. "A Stoic? So you're telling me you won't get mad if I tell you that I'm seeing someone else now?" Because that's pretty much what you're asking for, right? Dylan winced but quickly pushed down the emotion, remembering his training. I would handle that calmly. Emotionally unfazed. I would not let it affect my inner peace, he said, trying to sound confident. Uh-huh, she said, clearly not convinced. Well, good luck with your inner peace, she added, hanging up abruptly. Dylan sat there, staring at the phone in disbelief. He'd expected something, maybe a little hesitation, maybe some curiosity about his newfound philosophy. What he didn't expect was to sound like a robot. He couldn't believe it. This wasn't how he imagined it. He had wanted to come across as calm, cool, and collected. Instead, he sounded like a guy trying to avoid the emotional fallout of a breakup by pretending he didn't care. Well, this is a disaster, Dylan muttered to himself. But he wasn't going to give up. He wasn't going to just throw away everything he had learned about Stoicism. No. He would become the Stoic man Samantha would eventually come crawling back to. He would show her that a true Stoic man, one who embraced peace over passion, was exactly what she needed. He walked to the kitchen, grabbed a glass of water, and took a long sip, practicing his calmness. He didn't need Samantha to understand right away. The key was patience. He'd be calm, he'd be cool, and he'd wait. That was the way of the Stoic. Dylan's first attempt at practicing Stoicism in the real world didn't go as planned. He had to admit that it felt incredibly awkward to be this detached, especially when his heart was still fighting his brain for control. It was only the second day since his call to Samantha, and already he was beginning to doubt his whole, emotionally invincible, approach. The idea seemed easy in theory, but in practice, it felt like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. Every time he thought he had it under control, his emotions came surging to the surface. The next day, he ran into Samantha at a coffee shop. She had no idea he'd be there, but Dylan saw an opportunity to test his newfound philosophy. He took a deep breath, adjusting his posture, straightening his back like he'd read in his Stoicism articles. He was calm. He was composed. He was ready. She was sitting at a table with some friends, sipping on a latte and laughing. Dylan approached her table, his mind racing with lines he could say to show her how cool and controlled he had become. This wasn't just about getting back together. No, this was about proving that he was more than just some emotional mess. He was a man of wisdom, and wisdom, he was sure, was irresistible. Hey, he said, his voice steady. Samantha looked up, her smile fading for a second. Well, well. Look who's all Mr. Zen now. What's up, Dylan? I just wanted to say I've been thinking about things, Dylan said, trying to sound as unemotional as possible. I'm really focusing on being at peace with myself. I'm learning not to let anything disturb my calm. Wow, Samantha said, eyes narrowing. You sound like a walking self-help book. Is this what you've been up to, finding inner peace or whatever? Dylan smiled, trying to maintain the detachment. Exactly. I've been focusing on the present moment. There's no need to dwell on past mistakes or future concerns. She tilted her head and raised an eyebrow, a grin tugging at the corner of her lips. So, you're like a Stoic monk now? No emotions, just tranquility? Dylan nodded confidently. Precisely. Samantha leaned back in her chair, taking a slow sip of her latte. Okay, I'm testing you then, she said with a mischievous glint in her eyes. I'm going to say something totally outrageous, and you're going to keep your cool, right? Dylan's heart skipped a beat. I can handle it. I'm Stoic. She smiled devilishly, putting her cup down. All right, Dylan. I'm seeing someone else now. He's better than you in every way. More mature. More confident. More everything. Dylan's stomach dropped. This was the test. He had to pass it. But the words stung, and for a moment, a flash of anger boiled inside him. His chest tightened, but he fought it back, forcing himself to smile like a Zen monk. That's fine. I wish you both peace and fulfillment. I'm at peace with my own path. Samantha stared at him, clearly expecting some kind of reaction. She pushed further. You're okay with that? Just like that? No jealousy? No sadness? Dylan took a breath. His mind screamed for him to react, to say something, to show that he cared, but he kept it together. I am unaffected. Your choices are yours, and they don't disturb my inner peace. I have transcended the need for validation. Samantha burst into laughter, shaking her head. Okay, now I'm really intrigued. You're telling me you're totally fine with me being with someone else, just like that? Yes, he said, his tone steady, betraying no emotion. She laughed again, this time louder. Dylan, you're acting like a freaking robot. You're totally faking this, aren't you? No one is that calm over a breakup. Dylan didn't flinch, but inside, his brain was screaming. He had to maintain his composure. He was calm. He was stoic. It's not faking, he said. It's just about understanding that attachment is temporary. Everything is fleeting, and my peace comes from within. Samantha smirked. That's cute. Seriously, it's adorable. But I think I just broke your stoic act with a little bit of drama. That's a nice little chink in your armor. She leaned forward, eyes gleaming. What are you going to do now? Are you going to just stare at me in silence? Or should I make it worse and tell you that your replacement is better in bed too? Dylan's mind blanked. For a brief second, a wave of panic washed over him. But no, he couldn't break. He couldn't. Stoicism was about control. He forced a smile, remembering his teachings. Your choice of words is irrelevant to my tranquility. I don't need to compare myself to others. Samantha sat back, visibly amused. Okay, this is getting good. You're like a human-sized emotional filter. All that drama I just threw at you, and you just dissolve it like it's nothing. She raised her cup and took another sip, watching him carefully. I'm seriously impressed. Dylan felt a rush of relief. Maybe she was starting to understand. He gave her a small, serene smile. Thank you. My path is one of peace. But then she leaned in, her voice dropping to a teasing whisper. You know, I think I could get used to this new Dylan. You're still the same guy I left, but now you're all, no emotions, no drama, just nothing. She paused, letting the silence stretch before adding. But Dylan, honestly, does this no attachment thing work in bed too? Because I have a hard time believing you could be that detached when it comes to something more physical. His stomach tightened, and despite the calm he was supposed to project, a dark thought bubbled up. That's not a question a woman asks unless she's trying to get a reaction star. But he swallowed hard, forcing his thoughts to stay in line with his stoic values. No. I believe in intimacy, but emotional detachment does not mean disengagement, Dylan said, sounding far more confident than he felt. Samantha didn't seem convinced. Well, it's cute you're pretending to be all wise and enlightened, but I can see right through it. You've been trying too hard to keep it together. And let's face it, at some point you've got to break. Everyone does. Dylan smiled, though his heart was starting to race. Not me. A true stoic does not break. Samantha raised an eyebrow. Well, I guess we'll see how long that lasts. She stood up, taking her empty coffee cup with her. Good luck with your inner peace, Dylan. But I think I might prefer the guy who has a little fire behind his eyes. Just saying. As she walked away, Dylan sat there, his mind reeling. He hadn't cracked. Not completely. But something was off. Something wasn't clicking. The stoic routine was harder to maintain than he had thought, especially when Samantha knew exactly how to push his buttons. But then again, wasn't the whole point of Stoicism to stay calm in the face of chaos? Dylan wasn't sure where this was headed, but he was beginning to realize that maybe, just maybe, he had more to learn than he thought. Dylan's resolve was beginning to crack. Stoicism, he'd learned, wasn't a simple switch to flip. It was more like trying to balance on a tightrope while the world tried to knock him off. His calm demeanor was starting to feel like a mask he wore to avoid dealing with the chaos of his emotions. Samantha's teasing had only proven one thing: he wasn't as emotionally invincible as he'd hoped. Her words had stung more than he wanted to admit, and despite all his efforts to remain composed, the reality was sinking in. He couldn't force himself into an emotional void. It wasn't helping that, every time they interacted, Samantha found a way to poke and prod at his stoic act. She'd stopped by his apartment to drop off some of his stuff that she'd accidentally kept after their breakup. He'd open the door with his usual stoic grin, ready to show her that he was above the usual awkwardness of these moments. "Hey, Dylan," she said, holding out a box of his belongings. "Thought I'd return your stuff. You know, so you can finally move on or whatever." He took the box without missing a beat. "I appreciate it. I'm at peace with all of this." Samantha raised an eyebrow. "Are you now? Because last time I checked, you were still clinging to this calm and collected act like a life raft in a sea of emotional wreckage." Dylan bit his lip. She was good at getting under his skin, but he was determined not to let it show. He shifted his stance, trying to sound nonchalant. "I'm fine, Sam. I've accepted that this is just how things are. There's no need for drama." "Yeah, no drama," Samantha said, her tone laced with sarcasm. "Just like there's no drama in the way you've been dodging me for the past week. Real mature, Dylan." His eyes narrowed slightly. She was baiting him. But he refused to take the bait. He gave her a nod and stepped aside, motioning for her to come in. "Please come in. You've come all this way." She hesitated but then shrugged, stepping over the threshold. "I didn't expect a stoic monk to be so welcoming. You're like the least emotional guy I've ever met. It's actually kind of impressive how numb you've become." Dylan felt his pulse quicken. She was relentless. But he fought to keep his emotions under control. "It's not numbness, Sam. It's enlightenment. I've learned that emotions come and go, like waves. And I've learned to ride them without getting swept away." "Right," Samantha said, clearly unconvinced. She perched herself on the arm of his couch, looking him up and down. "So tell me, what happens when someone really pushes your buttons? What happens when you want to explode but, according to this Stoic philosophy, you have to sit on it? You seem like the type who'd rather let things fester than confront them." Dylan took a deep breath. "The point is not to let someone else control your emotions. I control my reactions." She smiled. "You're really going for the whole mature angle, huh? You really think you've got this whole peaceful thing figured out? But tell me, Dylan, what happens when you get triggered? You know, when something happens that makes you want to snap." A rush of heat filled Dylan's chest, but he forced it down. He couldn't lose control, not now. Not when he was so close to proving her wrong. "I'm not interested in losing my composure over petty things," he said, trying to remain calm. "What you're suggesting is that I should react emotionally, but I choose not to. That's the strength of Stoicism. It's not about avoiding feelings, it's about understanding that they don't need to rule you." Samantha cocked her head, clearly not buying it. "You're so full of it. Let me guess, no more crying at sad movies, right? No more yelling at your exes? You've ascended beyond all human weakness." Dylan's smile faltered. "That's not what Stoicism is about. It's about achieving peace." "You've really lost it, haven't you?" she said, laughing under her breath. "You think you're this wise philosopher, but really, you're just a guy who can't even talk about his feelings without quoting some dead romance. Are you seriously telling me you don't feel anything right now? I'm standing right here, and you're acting like a cold, unfeeling robot." The words stung more than he expected. His chest tightened, and for a split second, it felt like all the stoic wisdom he'd been clinging to was crashing down. But he wouldn't let her see that. He wouldn't let her see that she had gotten to him. He took a step back, crossing his arms, and gave her a steady look. "People are free to interpret my actions however they choose. I don't need to justify myself to anyone," Dylan said, his voice steady. He had said the right thing. She would have to respect that, right? Samantha's lips curled into a smirk. "You're a real piece of work, Dylan. But I gotta give you credit, you're consistent. At least I know exactly what I'm dealing with now. The new Dylan is just a version of you that's better at pretending he doesn't care about anything." She stood up and walked toward the door, her steps slow and deliberate. But Dylan, let me tell you one thing, no one is this emotionally detached. There's always something behind it, always something real. He opened his mouth to say something, but she was already at the door, turning the handle. Good luck with your inner peace, she said with a wink, her tone light but pointed. Maybe you'll find it one day. But until then, I think I'll stick to a guy who doesn't pretend to be a robot. Just saying. And with that, she was gone. Dylan stood there for a long moment, the silence in the room deafening. His heart pounded, and the weight of the conversation pressed down on him. He tried so hard to be something he wasn't, something Samantha wanted him to be. But instead of feeling stronger, more in control, he felt like he was losing himself in the process. Stoicism was supposed to bring peace, but it was beginning to feel more like a cage he had built for himself. Samantha had seen through the mask, and now, he wasn't sure what to do next. Did he need to abandon the philosophy entirely, or could he find a balance between the calm he craved and the emotions that made him human? He didn't have the answers, but one thing was clear, the Stoic path wasn't as straightforward as he had thought. Maybe it wasn't about becoming a robot. Maybe it was about learning to face the chaos, and still, somehow, remain himself. Dylan sat on the couch, his head in his hands. Samantha's words had echoed in his mind like a constant drumbeat. He had always thought of Stoicism as a shield, a way to protect himself from the messy, painful emotions that came with relationships, love, and life in general. But now, sitting alone in his apartment, he wasn't so sure. The whole point of Stoicism, as he understood it, was to remove the need for validation, to transcend the cycle of joy and pain. But was it possible to live that way? Was he really achieving peace, or was he just avoiding the chaos of his own heart? He had tried so hard to suppress every feeling, every pang of longing he felt for Samantha. He had convinced himself that not caring was the same as being strong. But now, after that last conversation, it felt more like running away from what was real, like he had buried everything under a blanket of calm, but the storm was still raging beneath the surface. Dylan knew he had to face it, he had to admit the truth. He wasn't the stoic philosopher he had hoped to be. He was just a man trying to deal with his emotions the only way he knew how, by pretending they didn't exist. He had spent so much time trying to win back Samantha's affection by being this calm, collected version of himself, but in the end, it had only pushed her further away. She didn't want a man who was a stranger to his own feelings. She wanted someone who was real, someone who could show up with flaws and imperfections and still stand tall. The problem, Dylan realized, was that he had never truly let himself feel the heartbreak. He had buried it under the guise of self-improvement, convinced that if he just followed the Stoic path, everything would fall into place. But what good was Stoicism if it led him to feel nothing at all? What good was inner peace if it came at the expense of everything that made life worth living, love, passion, and yes, even pain? It was late in the evening when his phone buzzed with a message. It was from Samantha. He hesitated for a moment, unsure if he should even open it. But the curiosity gnawed at him, and finally, he unlocked his phone. The message was short, but it hit him like a punch to the gut. "I think I was wrong," it read. "About you, about everything. Can we talk?" Dylan stared at the screen for a long moment, his mind racing. Was this some kind of trick? Had she finally seen through the mask of his stoic act and realized that the guy she had known still existed under the surface? Or was this just another one of her games? He couldn't tell, but something inside him told him that this was an opportunity, one he couldn't afford to miss. He typed out a quick response. "Yeah. Let's talk." He didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in a while, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was it. Maybe he didn't need to be perfect, or unbreakable, or emotionless. Maybe what Samantha wanted was simply for him to be real. And if that meant embracing his flaws, his anger, and his vulnerability, then that was what he would do. Dylan didn't wait long before he heard a knock on his door. He opened it to find Samantha standing there, her expression unreadable. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't frowning either. There was something different about her this time, something more raw. "I'm sorry," she said before he could even speak. "I've been acting like an idiot. I thought you didn't care about anything, but I was wrong. You do care. You just don't know how to feel anymore." Dylan felt a pang in his chest, something that resembled both guilt and relief. "Samantha, I've been trying so hard to be something I'm not. I thought if I could just control everything, then I'd be okay. But the truth is, I've been lying to myself." She stepped into the apartment, her eyes softening as she looked at him. "You don't have to be perfect, Dylan. You don't have to be this emotionless guy who hides behind a mask of calm. You just need to let yourself feel. We both need to stop pretending we have it all together." "I don't know how to do that," Dylan admitted, the words heavy in his chest. "I thought Stoicism was the answer. I thought if I could just control my emotions, then everything would be fine. But I don't even know what's real anymore." Samantha stepped closer, reaching out and placing a hand on his shoulder. "Maybe you don't need to control everything. Maybe you just need to start feeling again, even if it hurts." He looked at her, his heart in his throat. "I've been so afraid of feeling that I've been running from it." Samantha gave a small, wry smile. "We're all afraid of something, Dylan. But that doesn't mean we have to shut ourselves off from the world just because it's scary. You're not a robot, you're a person. And I want to be with the person who's willing to be real with me." Dylan swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling on his shoulders. Maybe it was time to let go of this perfect, unemotional version of himself he had been clinging to. Maybe it was time to let the real Dylan, imperfect, vulnerable, and messy, take his place. "I don't know how to fix everything," he said quietly, "but I'll try. I'll try to be the person you deserve." Samantha nodded, her eyes warm. "That's all I want. Just you. No pretending, no stoic masks, just you." Dylan felt a weight lift off his chest as he wrapped his arms around her. For the first time in what felt like forever, he didn't need to have all the answers. He didn't need to be perfect. He just needed to be real, and for the first time in a long time, he was ready to do just that. As they stood there, holding each other, Dylan realized something that had been eluding him all along: Stoicism wasn't the answer. Love, connection, and being true to yourself, that was what mattered. And in that moment, Dylan finally understood what it meant to live with both peace and passion. To be human.